Hello students, welcome to the EPG Pathshala. I am Professor Richa Tanwar from the Women's Studies Research Center, Kurukshetra University. Today I am going to speak about female infanticide, female feticide and the declining sex ratio from the paper Social Issues Regarding Women. The objectives of the module are to make the learner aware of the historical background of infanticide and various socio-economic implications of sex-selective abortions. The deficit of women in India's population has been documented ever since the first decennial enumeration of people, which was conducted in the late 19th century. Over the span of more than 100 years, the deficit has progressively increased as evident from the sex ratio of the population, that is, the number of women per 1,000 men, which has steadily declined from 972 in 1901 to 933 in 2011. India shares with China and other South Asian countries, with the exception of Sri Lanka, this phenomena of deficit of women in the population. Both the large Oriental societies of India and China are structurally patrilineal, exhibit strong son preference, and here men enjoy higher status relative to women. Throughout the rest of the world, women outnumber men by 3 to 5%. In India, according to the 2001 census, there were 7% more men than women. According to the data from the sample registration system of the past 30 years, Indian women have been experiencing higher mortality than men from the age of 12 months to almost up to the age of the reproductive period. Again, elsewhere in the world, women generally experience lower mortality rate than men at almost all ages, such that the life expectancy at birth of women is greater by 5 to 8 years compared to that of men. In India, until 1980s, the life expectancy of women was lower by 2 to 3 years than that of men. It is only in the 1990s that the trend has begun to reverse. The sex differential in mortality in India, resulting from the discriminatory treatment received by girls and women, more than offsets their natural or biological advantage over men. Within India, the social practices and cultural ethos that undervalue women are stronger in some regions than in others. In an almost contiguous belt extending from northwest of India to parts of Rajasthan, Gujarat and Maharashtra, the undervaluation of women is evident in the sex ratio of their population and in their juvenile sex ratio. In fact, an increase in the deficit of young girls noted in the three decennial censuses of 1981, 91, 2001 is indicative of a strong possibility that the traditional methods of neglect of female children are increasingly being replaced by not allowing female children to be born. Of the deficit of girls in the population. If all births in the country or a region were registered, one would be able to calculate the sex ratio at birth and surmise the extent to which female births are prevented from occurring, since sex ratio at birth is biologically determined and globally ranges between 102 and 107 male births to 100 female births. Unless there is a conscious effort at intervention by human beings, the sex ratio at birth is most unlikely to change even over a long time. However, in India, except for states like Kerala, Tamil Nadu and Goa, where registration of births is nearly complete, elsewhere births are far from systematically or fully registered. A significant proportion of births occurring at home are missed from being registered. Infanticide. In the medieval period of human history, including that of India, witchcraft and infanticide of the female child both were barbarous and inhuman social customs. The victims in both the cases was the female. Unlike witchcraft, which was universally prevalent, infanticide was a social phenomena prevalent in particular social groups in limited regions, and in the limited regions too, it was not prevalent in all the communities residing in that region. It was a special feature of those communities only in which, on account of social complexities and acute marriage problems, infanticide was practiced. Healthy male children were required for wars. In some countries, the female offspring were buried under the altar to save them from falling into hostile hands. It has been noticed that in some countries like China, Italy, and Greece, children were killed to control the population. The Carthaginians were accused of purchasing children from poor parents to bring them up for being sacrificed at the altar. It is said that when an Arab had a daughter born in his family and it was desired to put her to death, the child was thrown alive in a pit specially dug for burying her. This practice was very common among several Arab tribes. Infanticide in India. In India, this custom was not prevalent during the Vedic period. There is no reference to it in any of the Vedas, Aryanas, and Samhitas. It is evident, therefore, that the Aryan society in the Vedic period was free from such an inhuman practice. In some of the literatures of the later periods of the Hindu civilization, mention has been made of the social preference of a son over a daughter, but no reference is found about infanticide of a female child. Aitarya Brahman mentions that while the son is the hope of the family, the daughter is a source of trouble. In the circumstances, it was but natural for the 11th century writer of Katha Sarit Sagar to observe that there is a world of difference between the son and the daughter. The former is bliss incarnate, while the latter is the root of misery. The beginning of infanticide in India is perhaps based on the complicated and complex caste system and its elaborate rules and restrictions regarding marriage and the oppressive privileges of the Brahmins. Furthermore, due to the rigid caste hierarchy and lineage classification among the Rajput communities of Rajasthan and elsewhere, settlement and performance of marriage had become an extremely difficult social problem, which is perhaps one of the major causes of prevalence of infanticide in Rajasthan. Infanticide was prevalent during the period under review among the Rajputs of Rajasthan, Varanasi, Kathiawar, Kutch, Jabalpur, and Sagar. John Malcolm noticed it in Malwa, where it was limited to some Rajput chiefs of the higher classes. It was also prevalent among the Jats of the Agra territory and Mandvi, the adjoining district of Kathiawar in the peninsula of Gujarat. In the Punjab, in the districts like Jhelum and Rawalpindi, and in some other districts like Mandi, Jammu and Kashmir also, this practice was prevalent. In special circumstances, the Sikhs also killed their infant daughters. The Jareja tribe, who were Rajas of their caste, concentrated in Morbi, Gondal, Rajkot and Jamnagar, used to kill their newly born daughters on the advice of their Rajgurus. The parliamentary papers on infanticide of 1824 and 1828 gave the extent and contemporary state of this cruel custom in various parts of the country. These papers gave full account of the crime relating to its origin, practice, nature and causes, and to some extent about the steps taken to suppress it. Like its origin, the nature of infanticide and the manner in which this horrid practice was perpetuated involved considerable obscurity. Normally, they killed their infant daughters to allow them to die by denying them all sustenance from their birth. When the wives of the Rajputs delivered a daughter, the female attendants who were with the mother conveyed this fact to the eldest man of the family available or to the father of the infant and did as directed. The mother of the child was accordingly informed to act in conformity with their tradition. The mother then put opium on the nipple of her breast, which the infant would suckle with the milk and die. Sometimes opium was put into the mouth, or sometimes the umbilical cord was drawn over the face of the infant to prevent its respiration, and the infant died of suffocation. Sometimes a hole was dug and filled with milk, and the newly born infant girl quickly drowned in the hole. It has also been revealed from the records that children were put to death by mixing their food with the milky juice of the plant Asclepias gigantica, known as akavan, which is a poison. The abdominal custom of female infanticide was widely prevalent in Rajasthan. It was mainly practiced by some Rajput families, though its occurrence was also found among the lower ranks of the Rajputs. Kuryar Minas of Jahazpur, Thakurs residing on the frontier tracts of the region between Bundi, Jaipur and Mewar are also among the mayors of Meherwada in the British territory of Ajmer. Attitude of the British government. The extent and contemporary state of the cruel custom of infanticide appeared for the first time in the form of parliamentary papers of 1824 and 1828. These papers were divided into various parts, and each part contained detailed accounts regarding the custom, manner, and territories in which this heinous crime was being practiced. A resolution was carried in the speech of J. Poindar at a meeting of the General Court of Proprietors in March 1827 that in the case of rights involving the destruction of life, it was the duty of a paternal government to interfere for their prevention, and if need be, the practice of infanticide be eradicated forcibly. Letters from various political agents and their counterparts in their presidencies has been addressed to the governor, to the court of directors, indicating proposed plan and measures to be adopted for suppression of infanticide. Several objections had also been made relating to marriage of the female saved, employing officers for detection and plans being opposed by the wives of the people. Lord William Bentinck, the Governor General, who was a utilitarian, was highly impressed with the policy of suppression of infanticide by Koch, Bundli, and Mewar and issued a congratulatory letter to them. The Female Infanticide Prevention Act 1870, also Act 8 of 1870, was the legislative act passed in British India to prevent the murder of female infants. The Section 7 of this act declared that it was initially applicable only to the territories of Oudh, Northwest provinces and Punjab, but the act authorized the Governor General to extend the law to any other district or province of the British Raj at his discretion. The declining sex ratio in India. The child sex ratio CSR is defined as the number of girls per 1,000 boys in the 0 to 6 years age bracket is declining unabatedly since 1961. In more recent times, the CSR has declined from 945 in 1991 to 927 in 2001 and to an all-time low of 918 girls for every 1,000 boys in 2011. It indicates that girls are getting increasingly excluded from life. The issue of declining sex ratio is a major indicator of women disempowerment, and it is located in the larger context of discrimination towards girls. It begins before birth, manifests in gender-biased sex selection and elimination. It continues in various forms of discriminatory behavior towards the girl child after birth in fulfilling her health, nutrition, and educational needs. Breaking an intergenerational cycle of multiple discriminations faced by girls and women is critical for more inclusive and sustainable growth. This includes gender discrimination, undernutrition, and poverty, accentuated by exclusion. This cycle is epitomized by the adverse sex ratio in children in the 0 to 6 age years, denying the girls to be born and to live. The sharp decline is mainly associated with an intersection of various contributory factors, of which the most dominant are deeply entrenched socio-cultural bias towards the daughters and a strong preference for sons, fueled by misuse of technology for prenatal sex-selective elimination. There are serious implications on women's health associated with sex-selective elimination, as she is forced to go for repeated pregnancies and abortions. The historical background. Indian sex ratios have declined from 971 in 1901 to 927 in 1991. Even its slightly enhanced level in 81, that is 935, was much below the sex ratio levels in that decade for not only developed countries like the USA 1058, Japan 1034, but also for the most developing countries like Burma 1016 or Ethiopia 1066. The shortfall in the female population is not evenly spread out across the country, but is more in some regions compared to the others. There are some states like Punjab and UP where this ratio has been significantly below the national average for all decades. There are others like Kerala, Andhra Pradesh, and Tamil Nadu where it has been above the national average. There are a few like Assam and Bihar where its relative levels have changed significantly between the two periods. Then there are a few like Maharashtra where it has stayed close to the national average figure. The levels of sex ratio have worsened over time in most regions. However, the rate of change has not been uniform for all regions. Areas with similar tendencies of sex ratio form several distinct clusters. They are not scattered widely. The disparity between the number of males and females can arise at different ages, including the reproductive age. However, it is a distinctive feature of the Indian population that there is a significant deficit of females in the child population of some states. It has clearly been shown that in a period with high fertility and high infant and child mortality, such as the one that existed in India throughout most of this century and the last, this could not arise except due to a very definite social bias against the girl child. Impact of caste on the child sex ratios. It is not possible to find any concrete data for tracing the region-wise impact of such an interaction. However, we do have some information for the early decades of the 20th century about one such cultural force, that is caste. The colonial census authorities of India had always been deeply concerned about the shortfall in the number of females in the Indian population. It was noted that after allowing for inter-regional migration, this deficit was persistently more marked, not just in a few regions but also in a few specific castes. Indeed, in the deficit-prone regions, this caste-wise deficit was particularly marked. As the 1931 census noted, sex ratio increases inversely with social standing in the Hindus. For example, in Bombay Presidency, sex ratio for advanced caste was 878, for intermediate caste 935, for the aboriginals 956, and depressed caste it was 982. An examination of the age group wise and caste wise data that is available in the census reports of 1911 and 1931 brings out the following points. In those years, most parts of India had a surplus of girls in their child population, as would be expected, with the prevalence of high infant and child mortality. But in a few selected castes, there was a marked shortfall in the number of girls in the age group 0 to 5 years. The Rajputs, Jats, Brahmins, Gujars, and Khatris were the prominent castes in this group where the girl child was missing. Among the Rajputs, Jats, and Gujars, there was such a shortfall of a greater or smaller degree in all the states where they were located. Among the Brahmins, however, it was very clearly marked in Kashmir, Punjab, and the United Provinces, but not so in other areas like Bengal, Bihar, and Orissa. In the Madras Presidency in 1911, the CSR for Telugu Brahmins was as low as 916. In the Hyderabad state, there was a similar deficit of girl children among upper castes, including the upper group of peasant castes, but peasant castes elsewhere were free from this tendency. Regions where the caste communities practicing such a bias were in a position of dominance, other castes and even other religious communities tended to imitate them. This often meant that the region as a whole had a low CSR. For example, in Punjab and United Provinces, even the Muslims had this tendency. In other areas where communities practicing the biases were not influential, discrimination against the girl children got diluted in the aggregate and had no impact on the regional CSR or GSRs. Region was thus an important variable, but only when there was a concentration of the biased practicing castes. Many of the principal states like Baroda, Gwalior, and even Travancore, Cochin had child sex ratios significantly below the national average. Current status, the data which is available, shows the census 2011, there is a call for urgent action with the child sex ratio 0 to 6 years at an all-time low of 918 girls to 1,000 boys. The nature and scale of the problem is extremely disturbing, as indicated by the findings. CSR is lower than the national average of 918 per 1,000 boys in 13 states. Haryana, 834, Punjab, 846, Jammu and Kashmir, 862, Delhi, 871, Chandigarh, 880, Rajasthan, 888, Gujarat, 890, Uttarakhand, 890, Maharashtra, 894, Uttar Pradesh 902, Daman and Diu 904, Himachal Pradesh 909, and Lakshadweep 911. The 6 states and UTs with higher CSR are Arunachal Pradesh with 972, Mizoram 970, Meghalaya 970, Chhattisgarh 969, Andaman and Nicobar Islands 968, Puducherry 967. The 5 states and Union territories, with the lowest CSR are Punjab 846, Jammu and Kashmir 862, Delhi 871, and Chandigarh 880. The child sex ratio has improved in 9 states and 4 union territories: Punjab, Chandigarh, Haryana, Himachal Pradesh, Andaman and Nicobar Islands, Arunachal Pradesh, Gujarat, Mizoram, Kerala, Delhi, Karnataka, and Tamil Nadu. There is no change recorded in Puducherry. Sharp falls in the range of 79 to 17 points have been reported in the child sex ratio of Jammu and Kashmir, Dadra and Nagar Haveli, Lakshadweep, Andhra Pradesh, Daman and Diu, Manipur, Nagaland, Rajasthan, Maharashtra, Uttarakhand and Jharkhand during the period 2001 to 2011. The steepest fall of 79 points is in Jammu and Kashmir from 941 to 862. A declining trend is even visible in the northeastern states other than Mizoram. The trend has spread from towns and cities of urban India to villages in rural India through a demonstration effect. The CSR in rural areas declined from 934 to 923 between 2001 and 2011, while the CSR in urban areas declined from 906 to 905 in the same period. The absolute level of child sex ratio is lower in urban as compared to rural areas. The rate of decline in rural areas is steeper, indicating increasing spread of technology. The data across districts reveals that child sex ratio has declined in 429 districts, which is more than two-thirds of the total districts in the country. In 143 districts, the decline has been of the order of 20 to 49 points. In 25 districts, the decline has been by more than 50 points. It is a concern to note that 120 tribal districts had child sex ratio of 950 or above in 2001. However, this number has declined to 90 districts in 2011. This points out that declining trend is spreading to tribal pockets as well. Gender differentials in under 5 mortality rates are also discernible. As per the SRS report 213, the under 5 mortality rate of female is 53, while the under 5 mortality rate for male is 47. There are significant gender differentials of 6 points, all India, in the mortality rates of children under 5 years. All the bigger states have under 5 mortality rate of female than that of male, except Jammu and Kashmir. The sex ratio in 2011 of 0 to 18 years. In India, the sex ratio has declined from 910 at birth to 919 in the age group 0 to 6 years, goes further down to 915 in age group 7 to 15 years, and to 876 in the age group 15 to 18 years, and is 908 for 0 to 18 years. The sex ratio is lowest in the age group 15 to 18 years, that is much lower than the sex ratio in the age group 0 to 18 years, and 943 for the total population. So if you look at the missing girls in India as per the 2011 census, at birth we have 9,55,041 girls missing. In the age group 0 to 6 years, we have 69,86,790 girls missing. In the age group 7 to 14 years, we have 92,65,437 girls missing. In the age group 15 to 18 years, we have 66,06,667 girls missing. And the age group 0 to 18 years, we have 2,28,58,894 girls missing. From about 1 million missing girls at birth, the number swells to close to 23 million for the age group to 0 to 18 years in India, which is now accepted as the age group of children to be addressed in the National Policy on Children 2013. Reasons for the low child sex ratio, that is 0 to 6 years. Low child sex ratio is a reflection of the strong son preference, low valuation of female life, and the low status according to women in our society. A son is considered an asset and a daughter a liability. A son is needed as the carrier of the family name, for the vansh, for inheriting property and land, and is seen as a provider and support in old age. A daughter is referred to as a parayadhan, who entails heavy dowry, wedding expenses, and moves away from the natal home to the residence of the husband and family, who acquires the sole rights on her productivity and reproductive behavior. Marriage is the goal for girls, motherhood is mandatory, and giving birth to a son is a must at any cost. Customs do not permit parents to live with a daughter if required, but a daughter is required for giving away as dan for kanyadan, which is considered a mahadan. Historically, northwestern India was a female deficit region where female infanticide was practiced widely and was banned by an act of law by the British. This law has now been replaced by the Prenatal Selection and Preconception Act. Now, with the preconception selection aided by the new reproductive technologies since 1970s, Punjab, which was formerly the British province of Punjab, included Delhi and the present state of Haryana. Delhi was declared as the capital of India in 1911 and Haryana came into existence in 1966 after linguistic reorganization. Dowry and the girl child. The growing bias against the girl child and the increase in female feticide or infanticide has been repeatedly linked with the growing incidence and importance of dowry payments among more and more communities. An early advertisement promoting amniocentesis tests had said, spend rupees 500 today to save rupees 50,000 later. Many NGOs working in various areas have also reported on the growing violence against the girl child in many communities and have blamed the growing menace of dowry among them for this. Gender bias everywhere is a social construct, shaped and sharpened by cultural conventions and historical legacies. As it happens, the clearest macro-level demonstration of this bias in India is the shortfall in women's numbers in the total population, the missing women, as Amartya Sen has called them. This persistent shortfall cannot be explained by natural causes, especially now that women's life expectancy is on par with men. Whatever natural differences there are in male and female capacities for survival, nature does try to compensate for those. Since male infants are more vulnerable to childhood diseases, more of them are conceived. Similarly, women run risks related to maternity, but as compensation, they are more resistant to such diseases in middle age as heart attacks. So we have to accept that this tendency is entirely a culturally contrived one. Perhaps the one unchanging imperative throughout this period in almost all communities in India is the compulsion of getting daughters married as soon after puberty as possible. The many revolutionary changes that have taken place in the Indian society and economy have pushed back the age at marriage for girls in most regions. Sex-selective abortion. The recent increase in the juvenile sex ratios discussed has very likely resulted from the rapid spread of ultrasound and amniocentesis tests for sex determination in many parts of the country, followed by sex-selective abortions. Because of the simplicity of the tests and their easy availability on the one hand and strong son preference on the other hand, female-specific abortions appear to have become popular and widely used. It is important to understand the emergence of this phenomena in a wider perspective. India pioneered in legalizing induced abortion under the Medical Termination of Pregnancy Act 1971 that specifies the reason for which an abortion can be performed legally. The Act also clearly specifies who can legally perform the abortions and the kind of facilities in which they can be carried out. The stipulated conditions are such that abortions performed by trained doctors who are not registered in facilities not specifically approved for abortion services are termed as illegal. There was increasing direct evidence from some parts of India that termination of pregnancies was resorted not for the reasons stated under the MTP Act, but because there is a strong son preference leading to female selective abortions. The gender bias was flagrantly aided by a combination of medical technology that helped detect the sex of the fetus on the one hand and the liberal abortion law that helped couples to abort female fetus on the other. In view of this, the Indian government, responding to the petition made by non-government organizations and women's groups, passed an act prohibiting the practice of prenatal diagnosis of sex on the fetus, PNDT Act of 1994. Under the Act, individual practitioners, clinics, or centers cannot conduct tests to determine the sex of the fetus or inform the couples about it. So, to summarize, the analysis clearly points to a collusion of culture or social norms and technology that is all pervasive. On the one hand, the son preference is so strongly entrenched in the Indian society, especially in the northwestern region, and on the other hand, the well-being and status of girls is so precarious once they are married that couples avoid having girls at all costs. Facilities conducting sex detection tests with ultrasound machines have proliferated and are found even in some of the relatively large villages. Despite the spread of schooling among the girls in recent decades, the patriarchal social structure survives. Women derive value and status only as mothers of sons. Their happiness and social status is the conjugal homes is dependent on producing sons. Women have internalized these roles and values to such an extent that even when they say that daughters take better care of parents or are more emotionally attached to the mothers, these statements have a ring of hollowness because, in spite of such feelings, more sons than daughters are desired. The shift to small family size, evident in India more recently, has not, however, been accompanied by a shift at the same time in the economic and social pressures to have sons and avoid daughters. As was stated by women in both Gujarat and Haryana, they desire and want few children while ensuring that at least one, if not two, of those children are sons. This has also led to increased acceptance and use of sex selection tests to achieve parental preferences to have sons while not exceeding the desired number of children. As is evident, legislation banning the use of sex determination tests has thus far not succeeded in deterring couples from seeking these tests or preventing the medical practitioners from performing them. Thank you.